My name is Elizabeth Mossop, Dean of the Faculty of Design, Architecture and Building at the University of Technology in Sydney. The UTS Alumni Awards recognise our most outstanding graduates, and believe me, the competition is fierce as we have many amazing alums. The winners are those whose achievements are outside the ordinary, pioneers and innovators whose impact in their discipline is profound. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Angelo Candalepas, the recipient of this year's Design, Architecture and Building Award. Angelo is an award-winning architect and a Fellow of the Australian Institute of Architects. Within a year of establishing his own studio soon after graduation in 1994, Angelo achieved widespread acclaim by his winning entry in an international design competition for housing in Pyrmont. Over the last 25 years, he has continued to build his career across public, commercial and residential architecture as Director of Candalepas Associates, receiving numerous accolades for his work, including the 2016 New South Wales Premier's Award and the National Architecture Award for Public Buildings for St Andrew's House. St Andrew's House is a three-storey not-for-profit residential care facility developed to provide accommodation and care for young adults with a physical or intellectual disability. Another award-winning project, the extraordinary Punchbowl Mosque, received the 2018 National Architecture Award for Public Architecture. The building features a large central dome and 102 smaller concrete domes decorated with Islamic calligraphy. The mosque's use of exposed concrete, the superbly articulated form and the play of light and shade create one of Australia's most distinguished religious buildings. Angelo holds a Bachelor of Architecture from UTS and is among our most inspiring graduates. He epitomises the immense depth of talent within the UTS alumni community and our collective aspiration to high achievement, not only being professionally distinguished, but driven by a desire to create a lasting impact in the world.
My name is Angelo Candalepas. I am a director of Candalepas Associates, and I graduated from the University of Technology in 1992, and the degree I did was the Bachelor of Architecture. I didn't really plan anything. I just felt that I really enjoyed being an architect, and I thought that that could be enough for the ambition that I imported into the work that I was doing. I wasn't particularly fond of planning too tightly what a career should look like, because I often criticise those that do that. I find the sort of people that are preoccupied with line items on their CV are the one-dimensional people that exist on this earth, and I'm not really fond of that way of looking toward establishing a name for myself. Rather, I thought that the best thing to do was to do as good work as I could and have as good reputation as I could from that work. I think it's an interesting question to raise challenges in the context of one's career. I would rather think about the steps one takes to enable one to become that person one has imagined they wanted to be. Insofar as challenges go, I didn't find anything challenging or a challenge. I found mostly that I was ensconced in what I was doing, and I was always wanting to be a person doing work that was better than the work that I was doing at any one point in time, and I think that still applies for the work that I'm doing today. I feel there's always an opportunity to become better at that which you do. I think everything has to have a balance of risk and stability. But I also think that the world has become this place where risk is something that needs to be avoided, which I think is a pity, because we've all become, in that way, a kind of risk-averse society, and it means that nothing interesting happens. And in fact, nothing rewarding happens either, because with the riskier of things that one does, there is a higher reward, in my opinion. So for the most part, I see that, and even institutions such as this understand that balance, or the necessity to have that balance. And I find, regretfully, that bureaucracies and institutions aren't that capable of dealing with that coefficient accurately enough, and such that they avoid risk at the expense of actually creating something progressive or cultural as a consequence. So I have found it very difficult to work with institutions as clients, and I found it very difficult to work with large organisations as clients, because there's a kind of default position to avoid risk. And I think in art and in the work that I do, which I hope has an element of the art in it, otherwise it wouldn't be architecture, there has to be risk, otherwise there's no challenge and there's no aesthetic dimension to the work that I do. On reflection, one has to accept the fact that the past is what makes people. And so whilst there were kind of horrible days, because I was doing a course that was part-time, we had to work very hard during the week and then come and be part of an organisation which had limited resources, being a part-time course, etc. And I have to say that the lessons are always something that one can reflect on after they've happened, maybe 10 years, 20 years later. And I think it's important, therefore, when I teach, to have that in mind, that all the lessons aren't the things that are understood in the room at the moment where they're being taught, but rather they're things that the students are able to reflect on later in their life and understand there, at that point in time, what was intended by that discussion or that really positioning moment in their education. And so I think that if I ask myself what I learnt most here, it was to ignore many, many, many of the people that were teaching me, and to enable to judge the frauds from the genuine people, and discover later that there were very few people that actually mattered in my education. And when they did matter, they really, really mattered. And as a consequence, everything that they taught me was something of consequence. So for instance, I can give you an example. Neville Quarry had certain things that I didn't understand at the time that he would say. He would say things like, I could have made this précis shorter if I had enough time, or I could have made this critique of your work shorter if I had enough time. And he would say things like this that I would remember and reflect on and understand in a deeper way later in my years. But also, there were people that were very pointedly critical of me because I was so incredibly outspoken. And what I learnt from that is that I shouldn't care about what they think. There was a moment where one of the teachers was really quite cruel in a way, but I was resilient, and I remember thinking, this is really going to cause me grief at this place. But what was good about the outcome was that I didn't yield to the kind of micro-politics of that moment. And what that teaches, or taught me, teaches you, or anybody for that matter, is that you really have to have standards, and you have to live by them. And it doesn't matter if your mark is this or that, because there's something spiritual in the dimension of every human being. And if they give their standards up for some micro-political proposition, then they fail as an individual, which means they can't actually succeed in life. And I think, without knowing it, the university taught me that. I think the only thing that is important is to care about what you do, but understand what caring means then is also important. And what does caring mean? Caring means that if you're interested in a subject area, you become the most knowledgeable person of that subject that you know, if you're interested in it. If you're not interested in it, then it's not important. But if you're interested in something, you become ensconced in it, you become absolutely submerged in it. The next thing I think that is important for people that are aspiring to be successful is that they should understand that life isn't there for them, actually. Life is something in which you are part, and opportunities aren't there for you. You have to recognise what you can take as an opportunity in a stolen moment which wasn't actually yours. And otherwise, all you'll do is complain all your life that those opportunities that you thought you were worthy of didn't come. Because the truth is that we're all not worthy of any opportunity. I recognised very early on that every day was an opportunity. And what I recognised very early on was that I couldn't afford to fail in any task that I engaged in. For instance, if there was a letter to write about some planning advice that was to be considered by some lawyer, I needed that to be absolutely as good as it could be. And that to me was an opportunity to be recognised in my field for that particular task. If there was a detail that was to be drawn, I needed to make that the best possible detail. And I saw that to be an opportunity in people's recognition of my abilities in that domain. If there was a door to open for the right person or a door to close from the wrong person, I saw that every act that was as such was an opportunity that I either embraced or closed off. And there needs to be a judgment for this to be properly conducted in society. And that judgment has to do with taking the risks which we talked about earlier and making sure that decisions are made at the right time. And then making sure, of course, that you don't dwell on decisions that didn't quite work for you for too long. Well, I come here and teach, and I love it. And it's a very important aspect of a professional's life to be able to engage with the academy in a way that I think enhances what that professional is able to do. I have to say that it's very important for me that there are good people at the faculty, and I'd left another university to come here because there were some wonderful people here. With those people, I think I've been teaching some of the best classes I've ever been able to teach, and they include Orzi and Guillermo and all the people in the final year, Miguel. I had suggested even to my son to come in. He had all the choices in the world, in fact, literally, because he did the International Baccalaureate. And living in Glebe, it was a wonderful opportunity for me to have my son at this faculty. So he's actually here, which is testament to my attitude to this course. And I hope that it can continue with all of those incredible international level people that I know is good for our country. But I also have to say that I have found it irresistible to employ people from the faculty And when I teach some people, I find some people irresistible to employ them. And the reason is twofold. Firstly, I feel that our industry is a failing industry. And in many respects, very good people aren't, let's say, nurtured into careers that are worthy of how good they are. And the testament of that is that where do they go is the question. I mean, where do they go, all these people that are so talented, or purportedly talented? And the answer is they go into commercial offices, and then there's a very clear distance from the academy as a consequence. Whereas I think if there was a closer relationship with the academy, then there would be this wonderful proposition where students could feel comfortable in practice rather than kind of like fish out of water. And I say that thinking maybe it's a little bit arrogant for me to say that I take them into my office and want to deal with them myself. I find that might sound a little bit arrogant, but the truth of it is that I kind of know them after teaching them for half a year, and it's a kind of selfish thing as well to not want these people who you have invested enormous amounts of time to not work for you. But having said that, they come and go, and I absolutely love to become their mentor. And I've discovered more recently that you end up becoming their mentor for life, because I've had people that I've engaged with in this way for the almost 30 years of teaching that I've had ever since I left here. And they always tend to come back, and you can see in the generations that pass quite how important that is for our culture. And very few practitioners do that, and I think that's regretful. Well, I'm very bad at being a barometer for, let's call it the commerciality of our industry, because I sit outside it in the way that I operate, I think. I've never really been clearly a competitor of sorts in the commercial market, so to speak. And people refer to my operation as a brand, but I don't regard it that way either. So if you're asking me, what is the future in the industry? I can see it is a broader thing than COVID, and it is a broader thing than the economy. The future of the industry is about how well or poorly we deal with the intellectualization of our offerings. And if we're not careful, we're going to lose sight of those things that are important. And I dare say those things that are important for me are not how much money a firm can make, but rather what it represents. And in architecture it means a lot, because what it represents is an entire culture's position. Because what we're doing is we're leaving behind artefacts that demonstrate the worthiness of this whole generation's efforts, and also their aspirations for the future generations of yet unborn people. So I think we've got a lot to lose, and yet people don't think in this way. How they think is how much money they're going to make, which is a bit stupid. If you're not good at anything, you won't make much money. If you're selling rotten fruit, you're not going to sell it, are you? So if we're kind of being uncaring and uncareful about our own profession, and all we've got at the end of education and at the end of whatever it is that we're doing that present people forward into the profession is rotten fruit, then it will be a disaster. And I think it's going down that path. But from my office, we've got a lot of work. We've got an enormous amount of interest from a lot of people to do work. And frankly, we have our choice of clients. So for me, I'll be fine. How can I put it in a kind of elegant way? if a person is good at what they do, they'll always be in demand. And I haven't felt anything that has caused me to believe that you are beholden to a sort of commercial reality if you choose to. I think people that chase money are not looking at the right thing. And people that chase kind of exactitude in what they do and a professionalism are probably in the long run better off. But from my point of view, I can only speak from my own experience. I've never felt the need to worry so much about how much I charge or what I do or the commerciality of my practice, because those are the things that fall into place with good education. And at least I had that here, where at least there was a whole raft of teaching of how to practice architecture in the practice sector of my learning. So that was bedded down early. But then what are the ethics you bring to the profession? And what is the idea of that which you do that elevates every discussion with whichever client happens to be in the room, and such that it equally elevates every act that you do within the profession? They're the things that people should be worried about. I find that those people have always existed, as have all the people that are just kind of careerists. They've always existed. And, you know, people say that these days it's a new thing that you have all these people that are overly ambitious, well beyond their capacity. Let me tell you, it existed in the years that I graduated as well. So I'm not that worried about that changing, because that's a basic attribute in the human condition. What I am worried about is, however, that people are increasingly thinking that they're choosing architecture or they're choosing their career only for its ability to pay, their rent or whatever. And I think that's a bad way of moving forward in your thinking. I think you should actually focus on what it is that you're doing and do it as well as you possibly can. And if you're any good, every other thing settles itself well. And if it doesn't suit you, or you're not even interested in it, you have to be very much honest to yourself, and say, well, I'm not actually interested in this, rather than being interested in the idea of being interested, which is not really doing the right thing by your own career. I mean, there are so many people that are interested in the idea of being an architect. I mean, it's a George Costanza moment, isn't it? They're not actually interested in what it takes. So just ask yourself, do I have what it takes? And it's not knowing things, it's being interested in them. If you're going to be a professional, you have to work for the work. And what that means for me is that the work is the most important thing in the room.